Hello, this is Iram Khan. In 2015, when Justin Trudeau first became the Prime Minister of Canada, he was applauded for a statement he made. A journalist asked him to comment on his gender balanced cabinet, which almost had 50% as women members, to which he replied, "Well, it's 2050." Well, it's 2024, and much to his credit, his cabinet still holds on to the promise of 2015, with almost 50% being women members and two members from the LGBTQ community. However, it may take a few years before Canada elect, or maybe a few decades before Canada elects a second woman prime minister or prime minister from a gender diverse population. Remember Kim Campbell in 1993, who became the first Prime Minister of Canada, a woman Prime Minister of Canada, was not an elected choice. However, she was promoted to the post after Prime Minister Brian Mulroney stepped down. The question we are trying to ask is whether the leadership of women or diverse gender at the top trickles down to grassroots level organization, or whether they mere sustain as symbolic representation of news hour headlines. We're trying to explore the environment that Canada provides to its diverse gender population and what it takes to work and have a normal everyday living without any inhibition and still holding on to your gender identity. Also, we have in conversation a very interesting person, Echo Keizer, the chair of Cure and Trans Health Collective, and a committee member of WAVE, which is Women's Advisory Voice of Edmonton. Coming up right next. Thank you. Heiko, so if you can tell us about yourself, a little more about yourself.
Sure. My name is Echo. I use they or he pronouns, and I'm a queer and trans urban Inuk living in what is now known as Edmonton. I currently sit on a municipal advisory committee known as WAVE, which is also known as the Women's Advisory Voice of Edmonton. And I also chair the Queer and Trans Health Collective Executive Committee here in Edmonton.
Perfect. So you have mentioned about workplace discrimination that you experienced at your workplace. Can you give us a brief idea about what happened?
Sure. I wanna give you a bit of context first. So,
Okay.
for me as a trans person, honestly, one of the first barriers that I want to bring up is the difficulty in getting hired. I think managers see me as some sort of HR landmine, and that type of discrimination before I even begin working at a place is something that I need to consider when I'm looking at what I'm applying to and the types of risks I should expect in different areas of work. I need to worry about, whether my employers are okay with my existence, whether my, oops, sorry, that was my alarm. There you go. Sorry about that. I need to worry about whether my employers, are okay with my existence, whether my future coworkers would be okay with my existence, whether the sector I'm applying for will be a safe space for me to work in. And, even just agreeing to talk with you today, I had to do a risk analysis of whether I want to risk my identity getting out to people who may not like how I identify. And so if I do get hired, I have had a couple times, had difficulty with managers that seem bent on getting me in trouble and finding reasons to write me up so that they have grounds to fire me. One instance in particular that really sticks out to me is this retail job that I had worked a couple years back that wrote me up for taking 1 minute too long in the break room. 1 minute. I had to sign an official document and everything that I had taken 1 minute too long in the break room, which, is ridiculous in hindsight. And I remember being so confused and hurt, and I felt very othered at the same time and wondering why
Mhm.
I was being treated this way when no one else seemed to have any issues with that. And,
Mhm.
I'm trying to decide how I want to say this. It's little things like these where
Yeah,
you get written up for something small. In management
right.
will, they initially make you feel safe and welcome, but as soon as you question them or as soon as you start, calling them out for things like, hey, I don't like being treated that way, it feels like they do everything in their power to shut you
Mhm.
down somehow. it's really taught me that when people dislike you based on who you are, it doesn't matter what you do or how
Mm-hmm.
hard you work, there will always be something that is not good enough for them. And, I've been very lucky to work in places that by and large haven't been overly unsafe for me when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to my coworkers. A lot of
Okay.
difficulty, it comes from a lack of manager support. I've had experiences where managers will support some coworkers, but if I'm getting screamed at by somebody, they won't support me. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel very good to feel like I don't belong and to feel like I don't have an inherent value. I don't think anybody deserves to be made to feel that way.
Absolutely. So, Iko, you just mentioned about your experience where you just took 1 minute longer in the washroom and you were shouted at or reprimanded. So, do you think how do you manage to disassociate yourself with such judgments in everyday life?
Uh,
What are your ways you're using to detach yourself from such judgments, such uh, feelings that you face on regular basis?
I try to remember that my life is mine. How I choose to exist is the choice I made for myself. I try to remember that I need to choose my happiness, my authenticity over what people might think of me because how I exist isn't inherently threatening or harmful to anybody. But it's
Absolutely.
hard. It's hard in the moment when you're facing discrimination. My mind it kind of goes blank in the moment. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
think straight when you're experiencing what effectively amounts to adults bullying you. It's
Mm-hmm.
not something that I expected, and I wasn't really prepared for that,
Yes.
nor should that be something that I or anybody else need to worry about. Like when it comes to where I'm applying to work or a place that I'm already working at, you know, I
Correct. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
receive any support, and it doesn't feel good to have the blame always placed on me as and
Yes.
being seen as like this subpar worker, which just isn't true.
Right. So you did mention about your workplace discrimination that happened, and it is happening as I get it from, on regular basis wherever you go. Uh, what what kind of support you get from the employers or the management or the HR? What is the support they are providing to diverse genders working with them?
I personally haven't had a whole lot of support, at least not in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I would talk to my managers and be like, hey, I'm not feeling very supported. I'm feeling this kind of way. And a lot of times I felt kind of brushed off, or they'd say, yeah, okay, sure. And then nothing would
So,
change. And it,
so sorry to interrupt you. How did you deal with that feeling? Like that made you more stronger and you came about more stronger?
oh,
Or
yeah.
like that is ideally like what I would think that we all should do. But what went through your mind when you faced discrimination?
It's like honestly in the moment, it's like I said, my mind just goes blank. It's really hard in the
Mm-hmm.
moment. And it's after the fact. Even, years after I worked at this particular place that I no longer work at, because I had so many problems with management, I can look back at that and say, wow, that was actually worse than I thought it was in the moment because now I've worked at places that have actual supports for people like me, actual
Oh.
supports for gender diversity and working with other gender diverse people in the workplace. This other place that I worked at, they just don't seem very interested in supporting their employees, which really
Mm-hmm.
sucked, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, how did your association with organizations like Women's Advisory Voice of Edmonton and the QTSC, which is Cure and Trans Health Collective, come about?
So with Wave, it kind of came into my life by chance. I was looking for work after graduating during the pandemic, which was not a great time to graduate. And I came across this posting on Indeed from Wave that was looking for members, and I had never heard of them before, and I didn't think that I had the skills for it. I have a science background, And a lot of
Mhm.
what WAVE does is equity and community engagement and things that I hadn't studied during my undergrad. But I
Mhm.
thought, you know what the heck? I'll take a
What did you
chance.
study? Sorry to interrupt you. What did you study, Eco?
I studied biology and chemistry.
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
Um, I applied anyway, and then I think it was 6 months later, I was appointed to the committee, and here we are 2.5 years later, and I'm having a great time. I'm very glad I took that chance.
Mhm.
With the QTHC, that was another instance where I was just scrolling on Instagram, not really looking for anything in particular. And I just came across a posting about a few
Mhm.
executive board positions that had opened up. And again, I was thinking, I don't know if I'd ever have a chance, but you know what the heck? And now they have a queer Indigenous person as the chair of the board, which feels pretty awesome.
So, how are these organizations contributing to creating an equitable society? Like, what are the contributions of these organizations?
WAVE works directly with City Council in an advisory capacity. So any policy or city project that has a gender lens, WAVE would then be consulted about. So this can be anything from transit safety to neighborhood redevelopment to city policy to rezoning and building green spaces and all that type of thing. So in doing so, in working with city council, we can ensure that women and gender diverse people are given a chance to voice their concerns that may not have been considered otherwise. Because it's hard to imagine the needs of communities that you are not a part of.
Yeah.
And with QTHC, they are a provincial nonprofit that deals directly with the queer and trans community in Edmonton. So a lot of work that the QTHC does ranges from counseling services to drug testing, community outreach, and that type of thing. And by doing this active community work, QTHC supports the queer community by creating a safe and affirming space led by and for the Edmonton queer and trans community.
Mhm. Given your association with these important organizations, what are the recurrent problems, in your view, which has hit the gender diverse groups or the marginal groups the most?
I would say a lot of people have concerns with healthcare access. A lot of people have concerns with affordable housing. A lot of that type of thing. That those basic safety aspects of everyone deserves to have access to healthcare. Everybody deserves to have access to safe and adequate housing. And these are things that keep coming up over and over and over again in a lot of the work that I do both on WAVE and QTHC.
Okay, okay, I see. And so, what is your opinion on the recent legislation regarding gender identity proposed by the Alberta government? There's a lot of opposition to the legislation. What do you think, given your
Wildly
experience with
belligerent.
gender discrimination?
Yeah, it's wildly belligerent. It takes direct aim at some of our most vulnerable citizens. When we're talking about trans kids, they're not even old enough to vote on these policies that are directly being imposed on them. And, I'm sure some have seen, but for those that haven't, there's a study that came out of the States that showed a 72% increase in suicide attempts by trans youth in states that have instituted these types of regressive policies. 72% increase in suicide attempts by trans youth. Like
Yeah.
that's
Mhm.
terrible. Trans
Mhm.
youth and trans people across the board are already at a much higher risk of suicidality, and instituting transphobic policies does nothing but make trans people even more unsafe than we already are. And, to me, it sets a dangerous precedent if the Alberta government is so willing and so keen to take away the rights of one group, who's to say who they will be coming for next? And I want to clarify, this is me speaking for myself, not for
Yeah.
WAVE or QTHC. This is my opinion for me as an individual.
Sure. Yeah.
With the current
Mhm.
state of world events and rising queer and trans hate happening right here in our communities, we
Mhm.
need more than ever for our government to take actionable steps to protect its citizens, not strip them of important aspects of their personhood. It's
Correct.
somebody's gender identity. It's not up for debate. It never has been and never will be. Transness is not a threat to anyone, and posturing it as some looming monster of sorts is just fear mongering that is based solely on misinformation. And in my opinion, it's an effort to pander to the unfortunately very loud far right minority that support the current premier's platform. So
Mhm.
to say it, to conclude and say it simply, I think it's awful, regressive, and not at all supported by any currently accepted scientific data.
But the Alberta government is claiming that it wants to protect the children with this legislation. What do you have to say to that?
Protection
uh,
from what exactly is my
uh,
question. What,
because they're not still capable of taking their own decisions for their own bodies. So that is the protection that they're talking about. So would you
I
agree with that?
I think that politics does not belong in the doctor's office. I think that
Mm-hmm.
trans youth deserve to have adequate access to medical professionals that will be able to guide them with the best care
Mm-hmm.
that is best for them. And that is different for every single person, right?
Mm-hmm.
What that looks like is gonna be different from person to person. And I want to be clear that this idea that like transgender surgeries are happening to minors, that's not really a thing. That's
Mm-hmm.
not a thing. And it's this lie that's being perpetuated, right? And when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about puberty blockers, they're safe, reversible, well understood. You
Mm-hmm.
know, making them inaccessible until, what is it, 15 or 16? Is that what they've put? That
Mm-hmm.
completely negates their usefulness, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the point in making puberty blockers inaccessible if
Mm-hmm.
a kid has already gone through puberty? And puberty
Right.
blockers, they're not only used for trans kids, they're also used for cisgender kids that are undergoing precocious puberty, kids that start
Correct.
puberty when they're like 8, 9, 10. So when
Yes.
you're putting in these blocks, you're
Mm-hmm.
also affecting cisgender kids, not just trans kids. It
Right.
affects
But
all children.
sure. But the government says that they want to have the parents involved in taking such important decision for the kids. What do you think about that?
I think that it doesn't take into account the many kids that don't have
Mm-hmm.
supportive parents. When
Um,
you don't have supportive parents, there's a risk of getting kicked out. There's a lot of risk for a kid who may not be in a safe situation. You know, you don't know what
mm-hmm.
these parents might do. And if a kid gets kicked out, what are they supposed to do? You know, how
Mm-hmm.
are they supposed to go to school? How are they
Mm-hmm.
supposed to support themselves, keep themselves safe if they're on the streets? How is that any better?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm. On personal front, have you thought about it? And like, do you plan to initiate any conversation with the government or officials from the government
Relating to the
relating to
provincial,
the gender-based legislation?
I've done what I can as an individual, and I've
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
been in community to, to protest these changes, and I'm doing what I can.
Okay. Yeah.
There's as much as my capacity allows, because they're taking aim at kids, and they're going to take aim at trans adults.
Well, so coming back to the topic of discrimination, today, what is your take home message to those who are facing similar situation? How are you going to inspire them? You came out being more stronger, being more resilient. What is your message for the rest?
I would like to say that it
Mm-hmm.
gets better. There are places out there where you will be safe. It's just a matter of finding them and finding your people, finding your community. If you're in a workplace that isn't safe for you, even if you can't leave in that moment, do what you need to do to keep yourself safe while you are in that situation. But find your community, find the people that support you in your authenticity. That is the single most important thing that we as trans people can do is be in community and support each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, Echo. And you have uh, willingly come about, and you've given your time, and you've spoken about such an important topic. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that was Echo Keizer talking about challenges for gender diverse population in Canadian work environment. If you do have comments, you can write into iramkhan06 at gmail.com. That's IRUMKHAN 06 at gmail.com. Thank you for tuning in.